Hello, aspiring civil servants. In 2013, UPSC had overhauled the syllabus and structure of the main examination. UPSC introduced world history as a subcomponent of history in General Studies Paper 1 mains stage of the exam. In my view, guys, this was really a laudable step by UPSC. Now civil services aspirants had all the incentive to understand the history of mankind over the recent centuries. It would give them a much better idea about the ideas and institutions that shape our world today. But unfortunately, over the recent years, the number of questions asked from world history have dwindled. And therefore, a lot of aspirants feel that world history does not have a good ROI, return on investment. And therefore, many of them neglect taking efforts for this subject. Well, if you ask me, I would say this is a wrong conclusion to arrive at. World history should not only be seen from the prism of number of questions and marks that it carries, it must also be seen from the perspective that it forms a very robust base for understanding other subjects also. Unless we understand the concepts and ideas of world history, we cannot fully appreciate a lot of concepts in other subjects. To give you a couple of quick examples, Indian polity in General Studies Paper 2 expects us to, of course, understand the Indian Constitution. And our Constitution is a modern, liberal, welfarist kind of Constitution. Before we understand the Constitution, we have to understand these ideas. Ideas of liberalism, ideas of equality, justice, fraternity, welfarism. And these ideas have not dropped from the sky, guys. These ideas have evolved through the struggle of humanity over the recent centuries. Understanding world history will give you a much better understanding about these concepts and ideas which undergird our Constitution. Similarly, if you take the case of society, UPSC has repeatedly asked questions related to globalization. Globalization's impact on different aspects of our society. But unless we understand world history, especially the history of our last century, we cannot come to a clear understanding about how globalization became the dominant idea of the world towards the end of the last century and in the first 2 decades of the current one. And therefore, it is very important, guys, that we give due importance to world history. Apart from helping us to understand other subjects, world history also gives us a lot of content for essay writing. Many aspirants find it difficult to generate sufficient content for 1200 to 1400 words worth of essay. And world history can come in with a lot of, content for this aspect also. You'll get a lot of examples, personalities, events, case studies that can come in to support your main arguments of the essay from world history. And therefore, I would suggest to you that do not take this particular subcomponent lightly. But having said that, I also understand and appreciate that a lot of candidates do find it difficult to understand the basic concepts of this subject. And therefore, keeping that in mind, I, Jawwad Kazi, am starting a new series on concepts from world history. In this series, I will be taking up some important concepts from world history so that you understand them very clearly and thoroughly. And in today's inaugural session, I'm going to take up one such concept. Let me take you back, guys, in time, to the time of lords and vassals, to the time of knights in shining armor. We will be talking about a very crucial concept from medieval Europe called as feudalism. Now, I know you are wondering why should we discuss a medieval concept when our syllabus is limited to modern world alone. Well, guys, to understand modern world, we have to first understand key pillars of the medieval world. And feudalism certainly is a very essential feature of medieval Europe. And therefore, we need to understand it. Okay, so let's get started, guys. Let's dive in deeper and try to understand the first concept that we are starting the series with, that is feudalism. Now, if you like this idea of a series based on world history concepts, then do let me know in the chat box, in the comment box below. And also, you may suggest some concepts that you find difficult to understand from world history, and I will ensure that they are covered in this series of ours. Let's get started, guys. Before we move ahead, let me quickly tell you that we have started a new batch. We are starting a new batch from 22nd of July, a new batch called SP2I Batch. This batch will be a one-stop solution for anybody who is planning to appear for civil services examination in the next year, that is 2024. This batch starts in July with a foundation program first, where we build up your base for civil services examination, both from prelims and mains perspective. After the foundation element, then we get into the prelims mode towards January and robustly prepare for cracking the prelims exam. In this stage, we are going to solve a lot of MCQs and gear up our skills for tackling the prelim stage, which is the diciest of all the three stages in this exam. Then we'll have the mains residential program for those students who crack the prelims in the next attempt itself. This will be an all expenses paid program by StudyIQ IAS. You will be hosted at the Delhi Gurgaon Center of StudyIQ IAS, and you will be intensely trained for the main examination along with your peers. The main stage will then be followed by interview guidance program for the candidates who will be appearing for interview in the very next attempt. This program has detailed notes. It has live classes for several hundred hours. It includes class test series, a lot of answer writing practice, current affairs programs, and a lot more. You can avail a special discount on this batch by using my code JDLive and get this particular batch in just 29,999 rupees. With that done, let us now get into the concept of feudalism. Well, guys, Europe during ancient times was ruled by the massive Roman Empire. The map that you see on the screen is that of Roman Empire at its peak in the 2nd century AD. Roman Empire spread from West Europe, including part of modern day Britain also. In south, it had the coastline of northern Africa, and towards the east, it included the areas of Levant as well as Asia Minor. This was the massive Roman Empire during ancient times. A centralized polity, strong rule ensured that trade and commerce flourished during this period. But as with all other empires, ultimately, the Roman Empire also met its decline. From around the 4th century onwards, we see that the Roman Empire will see its phase of decline. Why did it happen? Attacks by different barbarian communities such as Franks, Huns, and various other tribes, they kept on attacking the Roman Empire from the north, and this led to a lot of drain of resources. Ultimately, Roman Empire suffered because of it. Economic crisis of the empire due to overexpansion. As you saw in the map, the Roman Empire had extended its dominions over 3 continents, and it in a way crashed under its own weight, much like what happened to Mughals after Aurangzeb's reign. Then the end of Roman climate optimum. This is an interesting concept, guys. If you see the period of flourish of Roman Empire, it coincides with a period of our climatic history where this region of Roman Empire saw a very salubrious, saw a very conducive kind of environment and climate. Agriculture was flourishing. There were less number of natural disasters, and all of this aided and enabled the Romans to build up a very strong state, and along with that, everything that goes with it, like art, culture, institutions, so on and so forth. When this Roman climate optimum, that period of our climatic history, ends, the Roman Empire will also see a decline because it will have an impact on the agricultural production of those times. Apart from this, from 3rd century onwards, Christianity started to spread in the Roman Empire. Emperor Constantine was the first one who accepted Christianity, and with his acceptance of Christianity, the popularity of the religion obviously increased across the empire. Now, with the rise of Christianity, slowly we see the rise of the church also. The church became a very powerful institution in Europe, and it changed the orientation of people's lives. Earlier, people were more focused on the worldly life, the life that we live here on this planet. Whereas the church's emphasis was always on the hereafter, the life after death. The goal being to achieve personal salvation. The idea that Christian church gave was that man is born in sin, and the purpose of this life is to overcome that burden of sin and achieve personal salvation as you again go back and meet God. This naturally reduced the emphasis on worldly endeavors and increased the focus on other world, that is the world of hereafter. This would certainly have an impact on the creative pursuits of human beings during those times. Christianity also developed many subsects, many of them not seeing eye to eye, many of them having conflicts, and that also in a way drained the energy of medieval Christian Europe. This is the type of environment that we see when the Romans start to decline from 4th century onwards. This period of Europe, post 4th century, is regarded as the medieval age of Europe. And historians often have used the term Dark Age to describe this phase. Dark Age. What is meant by this Dark Age? This word or term Dark Age was first used by Italian scholar Francesco Petrarch. Francesco Petrarch was the first humanist. He is a thinker from the Renaissance period. He looks back at the medieval history of Europe and sees that during medieval times, there was hardly any quality literature that was being produced. And therefore, from literary perspective, he referred to medieval age as the Dark Age. Later, many others, when they studied other aspects of human life in medieval times, they saw that there was lack of achievement in all other spheres, and therefore the age started to be referred as the Dark Age. So medieval times referred to as Dark Age because of lack of new achievements, new horizons being opened up in different human endeavors. This period is dominated by church. Religion is the center of gravity of the socio-politico-economic life, and church is the paramount institution. Church becomes the ultimate sovereign. Therefore, slowly, steadily, Europeans became more and more superstitious, believing in concepts that were not backed up by reason and science. This led to lack of scientific temper and advancement during the medieval age. Europe does not see any major breakthrough in terms of science and technology during this phase. And therefore, this period is also referred to as Age of Faith instead of Age of Reason. Okay, reason here means understanding things based on logic, understanding things based on evidences. Instead of that, Europe was in the age of faith. Whatever the church said, whatever the Bible said, that was considered as the ultimate truth, not to be questioned, not to be analyzed critically. During this period, because of the domination of religion and church, we also saw that political authority started to fracture and diffuse. The strong central power of Romans was a distant history now. Instead, the polity of Europe had fragmented into smaller and weak kingdoms, especially in Western Europe. The kings were weak and the authority of the rulers was diffused. The kings did not have all the power in their hands. Instead, the authority was decentralized and given to local level lords. All of this created a conducive environment for emergence of the concept that we have to understand, called as feudalism. Why is this condition in Europe at that point of time? because Europe does not have a central power that can provide a strong rule, law and order to the people. But people are being faced with problems of invasions, problems of different tribes attacking them. So some sort of protection is required, and in that scenario, in that situation, the concept or idea of feudalism evolves in Europe. Now let us see what is this idea of feudalism and how it will impact Europe. What is meant by feudalism? Feudalism, guys, is organization of society in a hierarchical relationship. It's a primarily social, but also along with that, political and economic organization of the society in a hierarchical manner. This hierarchy is a relationship between sections within the society. Gradation of sections based on their importance. Socially, politically, economically, there is a gradation of sections. That is the hierarchical setup of society. In this hierarchy, the relationship was between an upper authority who is called as the lord, and below him a subordinate authority called as his vassal. Lord is the authority above, and the subordinate authority is called as the vassal. The subordinate authority or the vassal was supposed to provide certain services to the lord. Primarily, these services were military services. They were paying money to the lord and also providing some other forms of services like counsel, advice, ransom, etc. These were the kind of services that the lower authority, that is the vassals, were providing to the higher authority called as lords. In return for these services, the lord gave the vassal access to protection and land. The overlord protects and provides land to the vassals. These land assignments were called as feuds or fiefs. The land that was given to the vassals was called as fief. So there is, for example, a king at the top and nobleman below him. The king parcels out his land into smaller pieces and gives it to the noble below him. The noble has got access to land, and in return he is going to provide services to the king in the form of military duties, in the form of giving the king advice, in the form of paying revenue to the king, so on and so forth. So this is the relationship that we have in feudalism: lord and vassal below him. Now, what was this concept of fief? Fief was basically a piece of land or property that was held in return for service that the vassal was providing. It could be military service, it could be counsel or advice, it could be monetary support to the lord. This is the way in which the relationship existed between the higher lord and his vassal. The fief holder swore fidelity to his lord. The fief holder, to get this fief, he had to swear allegiance to the lord. He has to promise the lord that he will serve him with complete dedication. If you can see in this painting over here, this was a homage ceremony, a ceremony in which the vassal actually bowed down before his lord and promised the lord that he will serve him faithfully in terms of military service, in terms of giving him advice, in terms of monetary support, because the lord was recognizing him as his man, as his vassal, and giving him land, what we call as fief. Okay, fief, the term basically means the land that the lord gave to his vassal. The lord was giving protection and also upholding the rights of this man. And the word man was used over there. It's a technical term in terms of feudalism. Man meant the vassal of the lord. So the lord is giving him land, he is recognizing him, accepting his rights, giving him protection, and in return, the vassal is going to provide military service, he is going to pay the taxes, he is also going to give him other forms of support like advice, etc. So this is how European society, medieval society was organized during those times. This particular diagram will make it more clear for you to understand the concept basically. So at the top we have the king. At the top we have the king who parcels out his land and gives it to his different nobles. So this is the lord in the relationship and these nobles are the vassals. Okay. They've got large pieces of lands. Now these nobles further parceled out their land and gave it to individual knights. Okay. So they are lords in this relationship vis-a-vis the knights who are their vassals. Each one is a vassal to the higher authority. Each one has to submit personally to the higher authority. The knights then did similar thing for the peasants. They gave peasants access to land and the peasants were supposed to cultivate the land and provide the knights with food and other services. They will cultivate the land for the knights and then provide that to the knights and also provide other physical services. Serve the knight whenever he needs some physical labor, support his manor, support him on his personal land, so on and so forth. Okay. So knight gives them land and protection and the peasants in return give him food and services. Similarly here the knight will provide protection and military service to the upper lord, that is his noble, the nobleman who has given him this access of land. This nobleman will do the same thing for the king. So this is a interconnected kind of a relationship that existed during feudal times. I hope you understood the idea basically at conceptual level. Now let us go ahead and see what were the different terms that were used for the different levels. Now we saw kings, nobles and knights. That was a basic classification. But in practice, there were a lot of different variations in this process. There were many different layers. Like for example, in case of Britain and also France, this was the kind of hierarchy that we see in medieval feudal Europe. At the top, we have the king. Below the king, the next authority would often be duke. Now, duke was typically somebody from the royal family itself, a first cousin of the king. Since he is from the royal family, he also has the elevated status just below the king, and these people were called as dukes. Even today, if you see the prince in England, he is referred to as Duke of certain place. So that is a official, you can say, status or designation in that royal hierarchy. Below the dukes were the counts. Below the counts came barons, and below the barons came knights. You might have read about these terms in books of history or maybe in Hollywood movies also. So these were basically what? Hierarchical position in medieval Europe. And the last came the majority of the Janta. The maximum share of the population, more than about 90%, was the vast majority was the lowest level, who were peasants. Okay, this was the biggest section of the society. This entire section or this entire structure put all its burden on the lowest layer in the pyramid, which is peasants. Okay. Now let us understand how feudalism affected medieval Europe. What were the consequences of medieval Europe? Now definitely feudalism gave some sense of structure and stability to early medieval Europe because there was lack of central authority. It gave some sense of protection to the people who were living over there. But in the long term, this system turned out to be very counterproductive for Europe. What happened because of this? Let us see now. Number one, during feudal times, the economy of Europe increasingly became a ruralized economy. Unlike the economy of ancient Roman Empire or ancient Europe, the economy was a rural economy. There was absence of trade and commerce. Since there was no central authority, so no trade and commerce was there. Law and order could not be protected. Trade routes cannot be protected and secured. And therefore what happens is all of these connections break down and it all comes down to local authorities. Consequently, no cities survived during this time. Yes, there were cities, but they were not in any way as flourishing as the Roman times. So cities start to decay. Agriculture becomes the dominant mode of economy, and that too a backward kind of agriculture. Since there is no advancement in science and technology, agriculture also stagnates. All the burden of taxes comes down onto the peasant section of the society. The kings become weak because they are dependent on their feudal lords. The feudal lords provide them with resources, and over the period of time, these feudal lords became very strong. They were having access to land, to resources, to men and material, and the king was in many ways dependent on the feudal lords during the early medieval times. So kings become weak during this phase. And this also led to ultimately a practice called as serfdom, which is directly connected with the part of history that we also are going to study in world history. What was this idea of serfdom that evolved during medieval times? Let us now quickly try to understand that. What is meant by serfdom? A serf was a tenant farmer who was bound with hereditary plot of land. He is a tenant farmer, that is, he is cultivating land. He is cultivating land for his lord, and he is bound or tied to that particular land. His children in perpetuity, that is his descendants, will continue to live on that land only and serve the landowner who will be their lord. This practice of agriculture in medieval Europe was called as serfdom. The serf was supposed to earn his subsistence by working on the farm. He works on the farm, and whatever is cultivated, out of that he gets a bare minimum to survive for himself and for his family. Everything else is taken away by the feudal lord. The serf is just supposed to provide his physical labor on that field of agriculture for the sake of the feudal lord. The serfs, since they were tied to the land, they were bought and sold along with the land. So this was a system that does sound similar to slavery, but it has some essential differences. The slaves were independently bought and sold during ancient medieval times, whereas the serfs were tied with the land, and therefore buying and selling of serfs was with the land only. So when a land is being bought by X from Y, the X is buying the serfs attached with the land. Got this point? Independently, the serfs could not be sold, unlike in case of slaves. Okay, so that is the tying or being bound with the hereditary plot. Their fate is, in a way, intertwined with that particular plot of land. They cannot have an independent existence. Further, the lords also forced them to cultivate other plots which belong to them personally. So they were forced to not only serve on the land that they were bound to or tied to, the feudal lord would also force them to provide labor on their personal lands. And this was not being paid for. So it was unpaid or free labor that the serf had to provide. The serfs did not have full rights as individuals. Unlike other free farmers, these serfs did not have full personal liberty. They had to seek the permission of their lord for everything that they did, including freedom of movement. They could not move about without the permission of their lord. They could not marry without the permission of their lord. They could not even acquire and sell off property without the permission of their lord. They lived a semi-slave-like life, without any rights, without any kind of freedoms. That is the practice of serfdom as we see in medieval Europe. Slowly, steadily, this practice declined in West Europe in 15th century after the bubonic plague. When the value of labor increased, there was a sudden sharp fall in population, and after that the demand for labor increased, and slowly the practice of serfdom in West Europe declined. But it continued for a much longer period in East Europe, when it was finally abolished in many of the countries. Russia abolished it in 1861. Austro-Hungarian Empire did that in the previous century. So it continued till a very late period during medieval times, early modern times in East Europe. So this was the idea of serfdom, guys. So we have discussed today the concept of feudalism, its background, its implications, and we have also seen the related or connected concept of serfdom. If you find this series interesting, guys, then do let me know in the comment box below. And also you can comment on the concepts from world history that you would like me to cover, and I will definitely try to incorporate them in this series. We will continue the series over the next several weeks and try to cover as many concepts as possible for you. Thank you very much for joining me in the session. I will see you in my next video. Good day to all of you.